Welcome to Catholic Ed for All, your weekly insight into topics of special education in Catholic schools. My name is Dr. Raul Escarpio, and I invite you to join me each week as we learn how to be more inclusive in Catholic schools and continue to live out St. John Paul II's message of open wide the doors to Christ. Many thanks go out to RCL Benziger, who is generously sponsoring this podcast. RCL Benziger enriches the worldwide Catholic community by providing the most engaging and highest quality resources, programs, and services rooted in the rich and diverse tradition of the Catholic faith. And now, on to our show. On the show today, I am joined by Mr. Andy Kremer, Associate Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Diocese of Lafayette in Indiana. Why, hello there, Andy. Welcome to the show and thanks for being here.
Yeah, Raul, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be able to be on the show today and talk special education with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. So, Andy, can you please tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I began my career in Catholic education. I started as an English teacher, football and baseball coach in a Catholic high school. And from there, my coaching career kind of took me a few different places as I kind of continued to do different things within the coaching world. And then ultimately, it took me back to a Catholic high school where I had my first opportunity to be a head football coach, and then got into administration in that same school. Started as the dean of students, and then ultimately ended up there as an assistant principal. Stayed at that school for 9 years, and then now I'm fresh on the job, 6 months on the job as the associate superintendent for the Diocese of Lafayette, and it has been really a tremendous experience thus far, and I'm very grateful to be where I am and to be such an incredible diocese. It's really quite a community that we have here in Central Indiana.
What a blessing, Andy. What a blessing. So, am I to assume as a football coach, then you are a football fan, correct?
That's fair to say. Yeah, I have a group of friends that really like to do the fantasy leagues and all that. And, they've been trying to get me to do it for years. And coaching was always my excuse. Didn't have time. And so now I just had to be brutally honest with them and say, I love football so much that I can't just root for one guy. I got to watch the game and love the game. So I think that's a fair assessment.
So, okay, as a long-suffering fantasy football fan, you don't know what you're missing out on. So, am I as an Indiana person, are you a Colts fan, Indianapolis Colts fan?
Yeah, definitely. I've grown up in Indiana, lived here all my life, so the Colts are a big part of it. They didn't kind of move in here. I think it was until 83, 84,
right from Baltimore.
84 when they moved from Baltimore. So all my uncles are from Cincinnati, so I was born in 78, and for that 6 to 7 years with no football team here in Indianapolis, they kind of created a Cincinnati Bengals fan in me from the get-go. So I've been a Bengals fan for life, but of course, living in Indy, I definitely appreciate the Colts.
Okay, so at the time of this airing in January, you're hoping that your Colts or your next favorite team are in the playoffs at least, and you're hoping for better things for Cincinnati next year because they're not having a good year so far, right? So
yeah, that's about right. And as a Bengals fan, that's pretty much what we say almost at the end of every football season. So
right, and I'm a long-suffering Miami Dolphins fan, so I hear you. We're putting our arms around you and hanging our heads in shame right now because I hear you. All right, back to
we can commiserate in misery.
Yes, we can. Misery loves company. All right, Andy. So tell me, can you please tell the audience what you do as an associate super?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my main duties is the advanced ed accreditation of our entire diocese. So the Indiana Catholic Schools Consortium is all 5 dioceses in Indiana. We've got the Diocese of Gary and Fort Wayne, South Bend, Lafayette, the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, and then Evansville down on the southern end. And so we all kind of get together and have this consortium. And so years ago, it was decided that we would partner together with Advanced Ed as our accrediting body for all the dioceses. And Advanced Ed, when they shifted to the systems accreditation, was about maybe 7 years ago, something like that. So we get accredited as a diocese, and then we go in and we do continuous improvement journeys, what used to be called internal reviews, to each individual school or local school within our diocese. So when I jumped on board, it was, here you go. This is your task, your job. You got to learn about it, figure it out. So the good news is that our next engagement review, where we're getting accredited as an entire diocese, isn't until the spring of 2021. So I kind of came in the middle of that. So I can kind of get my feet wet and go on these visits to the schools, which is really amazing, is to see what some of our schools are doing and get to talk to all their stakeholders and folks that are there, and really hear about the awesome gifts that they have, and then also work with them on continuous growth, because that's what it's about. So that's one of my major duties. And then I also handle our textbook discussions with teachers, and we get groups together and talk about textbook adoption. Also working with curriculum. And so right now we are looking at kind of a curriculum day that we've got coming up this spring, where we're going to work on the reading standards, because that's our adoption year for textbooks. And we're going to have a group of teachers and theology teachers come in. And, we're really excited to kind of look at supporting our teachers across the board and looking at embedding those standards within a Catholic worldview. So that's kind of a cool project we got going on. And then, from there, it's just other kind of various projects and things that we're working on in our office and whatever our superintendent assigns me to do.
We call that duties as assigned or something like that, Andy. Don't we call that?
You got it.
So to borrow from your playbook, see what I did there, Andy? You have a lot. You have a lot of plays in motion or players in motion, and you're calling audibles all the time because you're wearing a lot of different hats. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And given that I'm only here 6 months, I've only been on the job for 6 months, and this position wasn't. We didn't have an associate superintendent in our diocese for quite some time. So, our superintendent, I think, Dr. Dispensary, is just really excited to have somebody to work with and talk with, and somebody that she can kind of give some of those projects and tasks to, so that she can make sure that our bishop's vision is getting to all of our schools.
Fantastic. So let's talk about that bishop's vision for a second. Where does special education play into the Diocese of Lafayette in Indiana?
Yeah, that's a big part. Our bishop is really a wonderful man, Bishop Timothy Doherty, and he is very into what we do. And he meets with Peg, and a lot of what his vision is making sure that we can make our education, our Catholic education, accessible to all of our students. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to do with special education, and making sure that students who families sometimes don't feel like they can be served, that we have the ability to serve them in that capacity. And so we've got a couple schools that are, really doing some pretty neat things when it comes to that regard.
Fantastic. So you were telling me earlier off show that you had a couple interesting stories or tidbits to tell me about some of the schools that are working with inclusive practices. Can you share one of those for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our high schools, I would say about 5 years ago, got one of the parents of a recent graduate got in touch with them, and their son just loved his time at this particular school. They loved the Catholic education and the faith formation that took place. And so he graduated, and they had another son that was coming up. I think he was in 7th grade at the time. And he has some cognitive disabilities and is likely a non-diploma student. And there was not many choices in Catholic education in our area for a student that was going to be a certificate of completion student, a non-diploma student. So they called the school and worked with the administration and kind of brought up the idea of, what is it going to take, or what can we do if we really want to try to get our son into this particular school? So the school administration, what they did is they reached out to another high school that's a little bit farther south who did have that kind of program. So they went and talked with those folks, talked with their administration, talked with the director of the program, and just kind of had several meetings with them, went and toured, followed some of the students around, had those discussions, and ultimately decided that, that they wanted to be able to support this student, that if the family wanted a Catholic education for him, that's part of our mission, and our calling is that we're able to support those students and give them that opportunity. So they developed the program, and it's a really neat program. Right now, they have 2 students in the program, and they're building it slowly. They don't want to build it too quickly, and ultimately, I don't think that they would support maybe more than 2 students per grade level. But right now, they have 2 students, and the initial student that came in is now a junior at the high school. So he's kind of been through that initial first couple years of support, where he's in general education classes, and he gets the support there. Goes through some life skills curriculum. He gets support with social skills. And so now he's kind of on the back end of that, where he's kind of doing more of kind of that work study program. So as a junior right now, he is working in the cafeteria within the building. So during those lunch periods, they have 3 lunch periods. So he will go in and he will work in the cafeteria for 2 of those periods, and then he'll have his lunch period as the other one. And that's kind of leading into what they'll do next year as part of that curriculum is kind of do that work study outside of the building and try to work on that adult transition for him. It's really neat. And the other student is a sophomore. So she's still kind of working through that first couple years of the program. And then, I don't know what their direction is for her just yet, but it's likely that she'll do something similar. Well, she'll do something in the building and kind of build towards that senior year work study program. So it's been really, really neat to watch that develop. And not just for those 2 students that are in the program and enjoying their time in the school and the faith, but it's really them sharing their gifts with everyone else in the building and all the other students, and to watch those gifts, be shared, watch those gifts be received by those other students. It's really incredible.
No, fantastic, and kudos to your diocese for starting out. I know that you're also trying to get it started. I know that you're very limited right now with what you're starting, but I know that you also know that there are a lot of resources available to try to include all of God's children. And if I can recommend, if you can start at the primary level, because that way you can just build, like the spiral curriculum that we know about, you could just build on those experiences and maybe start primary and work all the way to high school. And that would be something
Excellent.
special. Definitely.
Absolutely.
So your diocese is forward thinking in understanding that we need to include all of God's children. So I assume that there is a plan, or you're in the midst of trying to develop a plan for the future on how to include more students.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that's constantly in our discussions. And when we look at Catholic education, and you talk to a lot of different folks, and I think right now, you're looking at all these different trends, and you're seeing these different studies just about enrollment numbers and things like that. And we're very blessed in the Diocese of Lafayette that we really don't have much of a decline in our enrollment in our diocese.
Wow.
And that gives us the ability to kind of look at different initiatives and different programs, because it's always something that's on your mind, but it's not something that we have to react to, so we can be proactive in other areas. But you still have to work on enrollment. And when you talk about Catholic schools, you hear a lot about them being accessible and affordable. And when people think accessible and accessibility, they think more of the monetary aspect or financial aspect of going to a Catholic school. We've got to expand that thinking, right? I mean, being accessible is not just being able to afford it, but it's having the right programming in place so that when families desire a Catholic education, that we can provide it to them. And so, yeah, those conversations are ongoing, and I think we've really got to try. We've got a great opportunity here to be proactive in our diocese to look at building those initiatives.
I mean, I like what you're saying, and I also think that if we are making it accessible, because first of all, research tells us that anywhere between 8 to 10% of our population will have a disability and will require special services. So that's an enrollment boon to the Catholic schools right there. You want your enrollment to increase, we'll start meeting the needs of students that have disabilities. But the other thing, and I like what you said, it isn't only about being accessible, Andy, it's about being successful in the classroom. You're not just going to accept a student and say, okay, here we're educating students with disabilities. Here we go, we're doing well. No, unless they're successful in the classroom, then it's a failure. Can we agree on that one?
Absolutely, 100% right.
So there are systems that are in place. And we were talking earlier about Michael Boyle out of Loyola, and we were talking about Jill out of Grand Rapids, Jill Annable. So there are systems in place for those superintendents that are listening, or those associate superintendents that are listening, to support beginning programs like that. So with that in mind, what is one suggestion that you would give to another associate super or even a principal that is now thinking or at the primary stages of wanting to begin an inclusion program? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I'd give the advice that would just kind of lend itself towards my experiences thus far. I mean, I'm only 6 months into this particular role, but in 6 months, the learning that I've been able to have just by collaborating with others and listening to other ideas and having those discussions, whether it be at conferences or visiting other dioceses or visiting different schools, and what an incredible learning experience that's been for me. So I guess I think there's a lot of resources out there. So my advice would be to tap into those resources and talk to those folks and look at the different things that they're doing, not just to emulate it per se, but to make it your own and make it work for your particular diocese and your particular school. But there are lots of resources from NCEA and you mentioned Michael Boyle. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there that we all have the same mission, right? It's the mission of Catholic education and building our church and evangelizing to our kids. So I would just say, get out there and talk to folks and learn as much as you can from them, and the ideas will come and the resources are there.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, with that in mind, my final question to you, Andy, is what should Catholic special education look like? Pie in the sky.
Pie in the sky, right? Well, we
Unlimited
kind of touched
resources.
on it already. Yeah, we kind of touched on it already, that it's being able to make it accessible to all, and one of the foundational documents that we look at, right, is the Holy See's teaching on Catholic schools, and that's exactly what it says in there, is that we should be affordable and accessible. And accessible means that we've got to do our due diligence to make sure that the programming is there, that the resources are there, that we've got the correct staffing in place to help those students not only get into our buildings, but like you said, be successful when they get there. So I think we've just got to be accessible and do what we do, which is to make sure that families who want it can have that Catholic education.
Fantastic. Andy, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. I wish you nothing but prayers and blessings as you continue your mission. Hopefully a whole lot longer than 6 months, and we'll be talking down the road for another 10 years at least as the associate super down in Lafayette in Indiana. So nothing but prayers and blessings, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you to you as well. This has been a really great conversation, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Well, that's it for this week. If this podcast was a blessing to you, can you please head over to iTunes and subscribe and give us a review or a rating? It really does help other Catholic educators find the podcast and use it as a resource. Thanks again to the amazing people at RCL Benziger for generously sponsoring this podcast. Check out their new resource for Catholic schools, Blessed Are We, Faith in Action, which enables teachers to share the love of Christ with children who have special needs. Visit rclbenziger.com to learn more. Join me again next time as we continue to advance God's kingdom by including all of God's children in Catholic schools and faith formation. Until then, this is Dr. Raul Escarpio. Thanks for listening, and may God bless your day.